Chapter 13. A slut doesn't exist except in the mind of a person conditioned to believe that a woman enjoying sex the way men do is somehow deviant. Farida D. Sydney. What a fucking mess it was. It wasn't even afternoon peak hour, it just seemed like it was. Traffic probably peaked every hour in this place. The entrance to the bike store was hidden among roadworks, so I missed it and had to do the block again. And once I'd gotten the new stand, do you think they'd be nice enough to put it on for me? I had to book it in, wait a couple of weeks, fiddle around. No way. When I got back to Wirra, I'd be going local to the Sheepton bike shop. Since I wasn't visiting Rachel and staying a night to catch up and talk 10 to the dozen with her about life, our problems, feminism, the problems with the world, I'd be trying to get home by dark. I felt a pang about missing her. I tried to connect again through Insta with memes and even a longer message, but she wasn't having it. I'd hurt her. Weirdly, I didn't mind because Billy was fulfilling all my friendship needs, or at least that's what I told myself. The trip back was hell. It got winter dark and I was frozen into riding position. No feelings in my hands and not game to go too fast as my reaction time would have been delayed from numbness. It wasn't the worst ride towards a destination that I absolutely had to reach that day. I'd done a cold ride in the rain on the island of Crete at the beginning of the year. That trip was so magical that I didn't even care about the absolute discomfort when returning the hire bike back to the shop. It was only 30 kilometres from Iraklio, but it felt like I wouldn't make it. This followed beautiful days where I rode all over the island and visited remote, empty seaside towns that my fellow travellers at the hostel couldn't reach by bus and were wishing they could ride a motorcycle too. I absolutely loved the Enfield Himalayan, the half-Brit, half-Cretan guy who owned the business and who drove me back to the hostel had to put up with me just brimming with adrenaline and talking a mile a minute. He must have thought I was on drugs. That's the power of a dangerous ride completed. I'd taken an attic studio for a whole month in Exarchia, Athens, the home of the anarchists. They weren't able to anarchist anymore though, with every street corner featuring normal coppers and riot coppers with huge guns, playing on their phones and checking you out when you walk past. The place had changed since they decided to build a metro station. I absolutely loved that Greek young'uns and some older renegades presented such a threat that they needed to do this. What style they had. I'd also rented a very souped up step-through 350cc motorcycle that I zoomed around Athens on. Then I took it for a week around the Peloponnese, the trip of a lifetime really. I was so cold and sick with probably COVID that I seemed to catch in Sydney before I left. But this made no difference. Tears sprang into my eyes as I rounded mountains and spied huge, beautiful vistas, the likes of which we just don't see in Australia. It's not because they aren't there. It's because they haven't built windy roads through mountain ranges, instead leaving it as Crown Land National Parks. No need for four-wheel drive access here. The mountains belong to the goat herders and ancient little villages built precariously on the sides of steep mountains. How I loved it. I even took a train to Thessaloniki, too cold to ride up that way, and on the way back jumped out at an abandoned-looking graffiti-covered train station to then catch a taxi to the foot of a hiking trail on Mount Olympus. I had never walked in a forest with fallen snow on a clear sunny day till I did this. I should have been shit scared, but I was so enchanted. The sun didn't reach that side of the mountain, so I had to keep moving. Once I got to the chalet car park at the end of the walk, I realised I was really alone, and my taxi driver wasn't due for another hour and a half. He'd miscalculated how long it'd take me to do the walk. I slipped over on the ice and got the experience of the downsides of snow. How was I going to stay warm? The gods looked after me in the form of the owners of the chalet restaurant arriving to do food prep for the weekend. They got me in out of the cold, put me in front of a heater and gave me a shot of whiskey. My sobriety be damned. They even rang the taxi driver who they knew. I loved chatting with this father and son team, and the son translated to his father. She's a truck driver back in Australia. They were impressed and I was grateful. When the taxi driver showed up, they absolutely reamed him in Greek. Apparently the walking track was closed. I was very lucky. I wondered if I'd have gotten hypothermia by the time the cabbie showed up. There was no phone reception. Again, the adrenaline of a dangerous sitch made me so excited and proud of myself. No regrets, cabby fella. I watched huge roos jump in front of me as I slowly wove along the road of the highway. They'd clean me up, no problem. And then they'd probably stick around and punch my lights out if the bike hadn't broken their legs first. Not a good way to end this crazy trip from Gorgetown, less than a kilometre from home. I was calling Billy's place home now. She was there to greet me and was so lovely. She said something a bit odd, sarcastic really. Well, I'll leave you alone and see you in the morning. I expect you're going to want to go smoke 100 cigarettes or whatever you do. Did my cigarette smoking bother her? I didn't think so. Maybe it was because the dogs tried to get out of her house every time I walked outside the studio to join me. I didn't really see how that would be a problem. Oh well, if she was going to be passive-aggressive and indirect, what could I do? Billy was back to her kind self the next day and drove me into Sheepton to get supplies. I was so relieved to leave the bike in her garage and get driven. No riding for me for a while. It had reached -7 degrees here while I was away and it still wasn't letting up. I slept in, ignoring my chook duties that morning. So nice and cozy was I with my own electric blanket. Words could not describe my relief at being here. Billy even shouted me a meal at the old cafe in town with original booths. They made a mean veal masala despite not being an Italian restaurant. I was back on the fat of the lamb, or the lean of the veal as it was. We were laughing and joking around during our meal and a waitress commented on how happy we were. The Filipino woman asked if we were sisters. Billy seemed to be joking when she said that we were. Then she laughed. This made the woman's attitude change a bit, as Billy seemed to be mocking us somehow. I felt bad for her and wanted to say, no, we weren't, but that's a lovely compliment. There were weird sides to Billy that seemed to come out despite her trying to suppress them, despite her trying to be nice to me. I wondered if she thought I was a bit hopeless, a bit gullible, something. And this sister thing. A carpet-laying guy who'd come to the house to work asked if we were sisters. Billy replied in the affirmative. The lie seemed to no longer be a joke and she even added details. We're step-sisters. Once this had been said, there was no way that I could tell the truth and make a liar out of her in front of this rando dude. There was something not right about her. On this particular supplies trip, we went to the hardware store for paint. She was very finicky in particular, picking out a whole stack of off-whites graduating from yellow to green tint. She asked the paint counter woman to mix up a half shade of a particular colour. I really couldn't follow her logic as she started to argue with the woman, saying she'd measured it wrongly. You don't add half white, you have to mix it up according to the half-tone paint formula. I kind of understood what both of them were trying to convey, the paint woman being a lot more logical and calm in her explanation, and tried to intervene, to mediate. I immediately got shades of Madeline and her autistic outbursts in public. The paint counter woman was starting to get frustrated, so went and got a male worker to do the mixing. Billy calmed down and seemed to explain it to him with no problems. We were chatting away about something to do with crime when the paint guy added in a very loaded fashion, "There's lots of crazy people around these days." The woman who'd given up had obviously told him that Billy was difficult, even though she'd calmed down for him. I felt a slight spiral coming on. I was living with this woman and I really didn't know her well. This was evident in the different sides that were now revealing themselves. I guess I could keep away from going shopping with her. Would this be enough? My safety, security and mental health kind of hinged on whether she herself was sane. She so easily brought me into her home, her life. And what was the catch? It seemed too good to be true. I'd suggested that I pay rent now that she was home all the time and didn't need the dogs looked after as much. She came back with an offer too good to be true. $50 a week and yard duties, other maintenance around the place. Or 100 and no work in exchange. Because it was too good to be true, I insisted on 100 and yard duties. I really needed to work anyway, as I was being lazy and scrolling my phone too much. Billy, of course, agreed. I'd do anything to stay living here, even though I had nagging thoughts about her. I dug myself into a hole. So the next day I took the chainsaw and went and chopped fallen trees off the fence lines after a particularly bad windstorm. I felt really tough and proud of myself. Chainsaw chick. Speaking of holes, as I walked around the property, I again noticed the core flute pieces that were sitting in strange, out-of-the-way places in the paddock, places that were hidden by trees all around. My mind again went to the joke Billy sometimes dropped that any trespassers would be cut up and buried. There's lots of places to bury a body on the property. Just plain facts like that. It was more that than joking. The logical thing to do would be to dig under the signs. But what if she noticed the disturbed soil? This was all stupid. Billy wasn't a murderer. I started doing a shit ton of work for her around the property. Really dangerous work, to be honest. I paved for her. Not dangerous, just hard. I was proud of myself for this. The risky work was being up on a ladder trimming a hedge that was taller than the roof apex of her house. I used trimmers on long poles that were incredibly heavy, all while trying not to overbalance off a freestanding triangular ladder. Some of the limbs had become tree trunks, so I steadied my 2 feet and wielded a chainsaw, leaning right over into the middle of the 2 to 3 meters width of the hedge. I even cut down a few trees for her. It was challenging work that again made me proud. And if true, I was doing work that Billy herself usually did. I like a boss who does the tasks they thrust upon their workers. I decided to give myself a treat during this time. I would swipe Tinder just to see who was out there. I'd do my usual of only choosing non-Aussie looking black guys. I need to justify this again. It's not racial, it's cultural. Wow, that probably sounds worse. It's a superficial app, particularly if you're just into hookups. There's even a category you can choose from, which is quite funny. Looking for fun, complete with a party emoji. I would say the majority of young males are in that category. So if they're going to be community dick, I'll try to only go with the ones who tick all my boxes. There are brown boys on there too, but the times I've chosen Indian guys has not been a good time. They aren't subtle with their opinion of us, treating us like sluts and expecting that we're fine with that. Of course there'd be exceptions, but you can't work that out till you meet them. Life's short. I'll just cut to the culture who's better at hiding their horrible opinion of women. Another reason why I needed a distraction was that Billy had dangled something very unexpected in my face. Her own son. She knew I was into younger men, and she told me that he was single and could probably do with an older woman showing him the ropes, or some phrase like that. She then showed me a picture of him on her phone, clad only in a towel. Being Italian and Polynesian, he was an Adonis. It was a weird interaction and I just laughed it off, not committing to actually do it. I didn't hook up with boys who look like that, in Australia anyway. Once in Thailand, I spent a weekend with a pro soccer player from Cote d'Ivoire who was in that category. Normally those ones go for pumped up young blondes. I didn't even bother swiping on them. Billy even organised a dinner at the tavern up the highway with her ex-husband and this son. It was a fun night. We laughed a lot. I tried to stay staunch as I'd not agreed to Billy that I would fuck her son. Typing this sounds even weirder than the initial interaction. Why would you push your son on your tenant? I thought it was a trap of some kind, but I didn't know what kind. Despite my attempts to hide my lust for this ridiculously good-looking rooster, I blushed up at one point when he made me laugh. Billy put her head down and really giggled to herself about this. She was reveling in my helplessness. Her son would catch my eyes and hold them in a smile. Was he in on it? I tried to turn all my attention to the father, who was my age and reminded me of Sicilian guys back in my hometown. We talked easily. This whole thing was a kind of torture. When we left, her son fell in step with me and we started to talk motorcycles. I couldn't help but be short with him when we said our goodbyes. I know I like young men, but I don't do setups by mothers. It seemed wrong, like something they do in a cult. Nevertheless, I couldn't stop thinking about him and what it would be like. He was 22 or something. Bash was not a patch on Billy's son. He lived on my side of the city in a share house, but the flatmates all seemed to be out of sight, which I preferred. He was light-skinned, culturally ambiguous, and meant to be 5'7" or something. He had a massive afro fuzz that framed his little head, which I suspected he measured those last 7 inches of. Because he was definitely my height. I didn't mind because I like bantamweights in case I have to throw them off me. But why lie? He was very techie with a massive gaming screen, chair and whole setup. I did like black nerds the most, unless they were incels, of course. Most of them didn't need to be because they were baseline good looking. Billy was passable. I sat on his bed in his tiny room and we talked bikes. He was a speed racer type of boy. I really respected that too. He showed me a GoPro helmet frame he'd printed on his 3D printer. So he was a black nerd with a lot of money. I expressed interest in this as I'd never seen one. As he showed me the coils of plastic that was the printing material, he leaned across me on the bed. I thought I'd better get this show on the road as I stroked his hairless arm. He followed suit and started to stroke my leg. All the while we chatted about bikes and things. This is my favourite part, really. The inevitable was going to happen, but the polite conversation was still going on. Then he leaned in with a kiss. He was initially respectful and good, but then he wasn't. While I was on top of him and about to come, he whispered, "You're such a slut." I rolled off him and said, "No." I figured he was just bad at dirty talk. A porn tragic who believed women liked that talk. I didn't think he meant it because his tone changed and he asked if I was okay. I said yes, dropping the subject for the benefit of the doubt. He found it hard to come, which was a pretty typical thing with porn tragics. I hate this about myself, but I suggested that I lay on my belly and he do his thing behind me. This was twofold, allowing me to be lazy and to speed up the bad sex. Because I'm menopausal, my vaginal walls are thinner and sex can sometimes hurt if I'm not lubricated enough. This was not a turn-on, so it started to hurt. I just made painful sounds and tried to grit my teeth through it. He laughed an evil little laugh that really gave away the fact that he liked inflicting this pain. I was going to stop him when he stopped moving. Instead of his narrow-hip little thrust, he started prodding my ass, pulling it up to look at my asshole. I had hemorrhoids, so I wasn't down with this. He was robotic, and I was no longer turned on. I got him to roll off me, and we lay there for a bit silently. I told him that I'd better make tracks. While I was dressing, he started kissing me and coaxing me back into bed. I'd make a great sex worker in my attempts at pleasing these fucking dudes. I knelt beside him and jerked him off, talking good dirty talk, not the insulting kind. My arm got sore, as it always does in this position. I tensed up with urgency at trying to finish the session, so he took over. Good. He should have done this all along. Porn tragics are gonna porn tragic. When it was over, I quickly put my clothes on. Something came up about our preference type on Tinder, and I explained that young males are my fetish. He came back with something quite unbelievable. I just like pretty women. It's not a fetish for me. What bullshit. He was a MILF hunter like all the others. Then his tone got sad. Because I'm black, only in the hair department, I get older women having one-night stands with me and not coming back. Firstly, he should consider himself lucky. Secondly, he'd given away his opinion of women when he called me a slut. And thirdly, most ashamedly, I kind of believed him in the moment and gave him my number, telling him to give me a call. I hadn't been having much luck on Tinder, not like the luck I had in Beach Town. I pretty much got every male I swiped on. I think this was because I put less attractive pics up this time. I thought he'd call for more NSA action, as that's all it was. Weirdly, he never did, like they usually do. So I was back to fantasizing about Billy's son. There was no way I was going to initiate that. Maybe if he did, and only without his mother knowing. He never came to the property, so I doubted it would happen organically. In fact, none of her family ever visited her on the property. She always went into the city to see them. I wondered what this was about. Did they find her a bit much? Billy seemed to talk about them a lot, so there was no ill will. Who'd know the inner workings of family affairs, though? I was getting more than enough info off her about her family of origin, so I didn't have a lot of bandwidth left to listen to problems with current family. During this time, I enacted something that I'd been thinking about all the way back to Wirra. I'd even discussed it with Ralph, which turned out to be helpful. The jobs in the grain industry that I was hoping to find over in WA were present here in New South Wales. In fact, they were less than a day's drive away in the grain-growing flatlands. Ralph said he'd worked for a big grain concern years ago before he became a truckie. He did a bit of everything. I asked him what it was like and he said, "You've got to start somewhere." I didn't let this deter me. I applied and ended up getting a start. It was in a small town in the middle of nowhere, Dingleford, about 4 hours away from Wirra. The plant supervisor who rang me to organise the job was a woman. I was very relieved about that. When I first got the email letting me know my application had been a success, I ran out to tell Billy. She was talking to an older fella who was picking up the gas bottles. He was known to her, so she did the whole "she's my sister" thing. Billy was really committing to this joke. I didn't think twice about it though. I was just so chuffed that I got the job. And a little part of me was proud that someone like Billy wanted to call me her sister. Maybe there was another innocent reason for this. Billy was a serial monogamist. Women would come into her life off the apps and she'd be boots and all in, meeting the family. Next minute she'd be broken up with them and complaining to me about them. I always took her side. What else was I supposed to do? Tell her that she tried to go LTR on them too soon? Because she was same-sex attracted, she mightn't have wanted gay women to think I was her partner, freeing her up for more options. It was only tradies and waitresses who didn't seem gay so far that she'd told. Maybe she told her dates that when I wasn't around. I had to commit to it too, whether I liked it or not. Before I'd gotten this email, I spent so many weeks just praying that I'd get the job. I didn't know what I'd do if I didn't get it, what my mental state would be like. I'd gotten a Christmas rush parcel delivering job with Australia Post also in nearby Canberra, so I had options. I really didn't want to do it though. I'd worked for AusPost in Beachtown before I got the commercial delivery job with the office supplies company. It wasn't a friendly atmosphere and it was bad on my van. Being a diesel, it's better to leave it running when I stepped out to deliver. This made it vulnerable to being knocked off easily with the engine still running. We carted thousands of dollars worth of freight every day, so it would have been worthwhile thieving. I didn't want to put my precious van through the stop-start of that job. Although I was happy and I was even discovering my creative side again, doing pen and watercolours of vintage cars and motorcycles, I must have been depressed beneath the surface. The fact that I thought a damn job would cure this meant I was pretty misled. I'd been stressed about the van coming back before the job started. Eventually I got the call one day from Ralph. I'd been vanless and without many clothes for 2 months now. I always adapted though. This van situation was pretty paramount to the job. I was so thrilled when I was reunited with it and could take it along to my mechanic con. Poor van, the things I put it through. Beyond living with Billy, I still needed to find my tribe. I even attempted it quite successfully when I reached out to a female-only riders group. We went out on a ride around my area and I was proud to be up the back of the several learner riders who made up most of the riding group. There's always new women riders now. More and more. I loved having the protective role of being the rider who had cars tailgating me instead of the newbies. It was something that guilted me out when I first started riding, but it never scared me. I'd already gotten the job when I rode out with them, so I was in a great way. I was sad that the next group ride would be when I was out west. The grain season went for a couple of months. I was surely going to join them when I got back. They were such a cool bunch of women. Sitting in a cafe with them laughing, I could feel the warmth and support that only all-female company brings. I rewatched the movie, well, more like a documentary, Nomadland. I read the book and knew it all really well because I could see myself ending up like the travelling woman who's the star, without the poverty and no other option but to live like this, of course. Though, spoiler, in the end she chooses that life over being offered somewhere to live. When she visits the little company box of a house she used to live in an abandoned company town, she gazes out across the view of plains she had from her kitchen window and realises she now lives in that view. It's quite a scene. Another scene which stuck out to me was where she works in a sugar beet processing plant, manning, or womaning, the weighbridge and sample stand, 2 jobs that exist in grain processing. It's hard, repetitive work. To top it off, she's huddled around a drum fire with all the other blokey blokes. One is describing a tattoo he wants to get on his arm or somewhere. The look on her face says that she wished she were dead. Watching this right before I went out to Dingleford made me nervous about what I was going to find. What were the blokey blokes going to be like? I was trepidatious, to say the least.